formalize that, and the issue that property is mostly extra-legal property is not being formally recognized in the majority of the country. Also, you get a sense here of some of the ideas of the extra-legal Tanzania assets. These are fairly hypothetical, but gives you a sense of how much is outside the legal system. And we'll talk about why we want to bring it into the legal system, why it would be good for the poor. The World Bank project actually was a kind of curious project. We spent quite a bit of time interviewing people in Washington on the World Bank project, actually spending quite a bit of time with the team in the field and having discussions with them. We've gone through 3 different teams that have run since 2009. Titling was actually kind of done in a somewhat more curious way. It's kind of added on to the 2005 initiative and grant from the World Bank on private sector competitiveness. And one subcomponent was on the issue of business environment strengthening for Tanzania. And here the focus was on the formalization of property rights through demarcating boundaries, allocating titles, and expanding legal institutions to deal with conflict resolution. And the formalization was very much influenced by, and you can see that throughout the 2005 project document, very much influenced by the doing business conceptualization of the barriers to the private sector. This is the World Bank's perceptions of what the major barriers are to doing business. I have a lot of trouble with it, but that's another talk, with the way they conceptualize it. But the kind of rule, it's kind of curious because the section on rule adjudication was kind of put into this broader sector private sector competitiveness, and in some ways it was very problematic because they began to kind of treat farmers as kind of a small business entity. And we know the vast majority of farmers are not really small business entities, they're subsistence farmers. And so the dynamics of it are very different. And it's very problematic to kind of throw it into there. Even we talked to the guy who originally started the project here, I won't mention his name, we try to keep everybody anonymous in interviews. But he also felt it was a bit of an issue, but for various political and for other reasons, it was included in the 2005 project, a $5-7 million loan from the World Bank. Now, along the DeSoto lines, farmers, including poor farmers, were missing out, they argued, on market activities because they're not legally recognized as contract parties. And you can see here the very low ranking of Tanzania in the doing business study kind of worldwide, which was one of the underlying motivations as countries try to improve their status, and so that this was sort of the underlying dynamic. In a concern worldwide, an Irish NGO, which had been active in Tanzania in 1979, took this on. They were given quite a bit of money by some donors to do this. We interviewed them. It's initiated, it cost initially at 1.8 million euros for an initial 3-year period. It got renewed in a second phase through December 2009. And the idea here was to heavily subsidize the cost of individual spot title. This was not systematic titling. This was always a big issue, is which farmers would get it. This was very tricky political and other questions associated with it. But basically, the idea was to reduce the farm responsibility, the notion that titling was expensive and was an impediment for poor farmers, and therefore what was an average cost of 300,000 would be reduced to only 5,000 shillings for each individual farmer. So we can look sort of at comparing the President's Office in Kurabita, 19 million, it's about a year old these to date, 4.3 million budget in 2011, basically. And the Ministry of Lands, about US 30 million expended to date, around 208,000 budget outlay for 2011, basically. The kind of arguments for formalization, particularly from the perspective of the poor, are kind of divided into 4 generic areas. And this comes from, I didn't have time to do an individual review of the empirical work, the regressions on it, but from a very wide reading of the literature, these are the kind of arguments that are in favor of it. One we categorize as the security effect. Safeguard village land from outsiders, reduce conflict because people are feeling more secure, the idea that property rights increase the motivation to invest in work, it's a way of empowering women, the collateral effect, creating wealth and liquidity, facilitating access to credit, serving as a bond, and finance for new businesses. Then there's the market effect, the full benefits of market-focused government policies, that if you're part of the market system, you'll be able to be influenced by the full impact of monetary and fiscal policy, and you'll be able to then gain access to the full benefits of rental input and output market. And finally, a transaction effect, reducing transaction costs, facilitating land transfers, improving the efficiency of use, systemized information networks where everything involved with transactions are in a centralized system which everybody can access to allow for greater transparency and speed of transactions in land. But there are warnings in the literature about this approach. Some of the warnings are the possibility of increased landlessness, that is, the loss of loan collateral, use of funds for the loans for education income, genuine investment, ease of sale to richer farmers. So here is the possibility of growing landlessness from it, and the possibility of greater unevenness, the possibility of basically people utilizing loans for purposes which are not productivity generated. In fact, in our study we said, what would you use the loans for? I won't be putting the results here, but typically the kind of things they said they use the loans for are in health and education, which are very important socially, but very problematic in terms of actually generating income to be able to increase productivity, generate income to pay back the loans. Issues also of conflict and security, and we see some evidence of growing conflict and insecurity, which I'll show you statistically. High expense and opportunity costs of the funds. These are very, very expensive titling operations. The question is, could you use the funds more appropriately for other purposes, and how do these sit with the overall priorities of villages themselves, which we took an opinion evaluation, and where are they in terms of the ranking? And I'll show you, the rankings are very interesting where they put titling compared to water, compared to roads, compared to health, compared to education, etc. So these are concerns for the rural pool. There are also the issue of the exclusion of pastoralists, which many are documented as being the big losers in this formalization. One of the things we found, and coming from the interviews, is we're really finding, and from our evaluation of some of the villages, we're finding that no land is being set aside in village land use plans for pastoral purposes. It's a big problem, in terms of where they're going. So you're finding, for example, in one of the villages in Kiteto, there you have it bordering Tarangire, right? That border's been formalized, and they're using a very heavy hand to stop pastors, of course, entering with their cattle, but they have not a single acre of land available for the purposes of grazing their cattle. And it's a big pastoralist village. So it's very, very interesting to see how this is going to be handled. I mean, there's the issue of the level of priority among the poor, which I talked about, the false hopes, basically, and we still have to test this, but so far in the allocation of CCROs in Manyara, we have not been able to find a single loan granted, based exclusively on CCROs. But that might be very different in our next stage of analysis, where there are a lot more CCROs.